Thank you, Mary. So now it's really, the expectations are really high now.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
not
no.
good.
The poor thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether that will happen. So that's what I would like to do. I called it work plan, basically. So meaning that I will usually have like 15 to 20 minutes, I hope, of introduction. And then I give you a task, either individually or in groups or whatever. And you do this task, and then you come back and we discuss whatever your insights are, more or less. Based on what I thought you had already heard, based on what Henrietta and Merit suggested to do, I just collected different things. And based on what I know, basically, I collected different things. So the first hour or so will be about the meanings of transdisciplinary research. I'll present you some and then ask you to review your own. Then I'll say a few words about how we conceptualize transdisciplinary research as a co-production of knowledge between different thought styles. Then there's an exercise on thinking about your own thought style and thought styles of others, perspectives basically, right? Then I'll say a few words about framing wicked problems, and then there's an exercise on challenging solutions that somebody suggests, trying to identify underlying assumptions. Then there is an exercise on different forms of knowledge and an introduction to that. And then perhaps, I'm not sure how long that will take. I mean, we stop at 3:30, right? Wherever we are. If we have time enough, there would be another exercise on clarifying roles and responsibilities. So we see where we get, right? And there are breaks as needed. You have to tell me when you need a break, basically. Or if you don't tell me, I'll decide that we have a break now. Let's see. So the first part is about the meanings of transdisciplinary research. If you go to Wikipedia, let's try to do that. Then you will see that at least in the English version, sorry, it doesn't work. I have to change that one. The point is that I want to make is that it's highly disputed what transdisciplinarity is, basically. That's what Wikipedia says. All kind of warnings, right? All, contains original research, unclear citation style. And this is the case since, since 10 years, 15 years. So we tried, when we had written the handbook and the principles, we tried to influence Wikipedia to bring in our view of transdisciplinarity. And it was corrected in no time, always corrected back by a group, I think it's a group around Nicolescu, who kind of tried to impose, as we tried to impose, his view, right? So that's, I think now it's called, there's the German usage, that's basically what we contributed, and there's the wider usage, that's basically what we contributed. If you go to... yeah, it should be the Swiss. That's how we kind of took over Germany. If you go to the German side, that's not the case, right? There it's very clear what it is. The same is, there is no kind of warning. If you go to the French side, no warning. This is because here buzzer up, tracing it back to Jean Piaget, that's buzzer up's view, right? So there's like, if you go to the English side, there is a fight. If you go to national sides, this fight doesn't pop up because different communities define what it is for this kind of nation. I think that is what...
Swedish side.
Yeah, I don't know the Swedish side. I should check.
There is a Swedish side. There is no.
No, just that I have to find... okay, doesn't matter. So I'll kind of go through 4 different, I'll kind of say something about definitions and then go through 4 different definitions and then ask you to identify your own, whether it's this definition or a mix of. Piaget is one of the persons transdisciplinarity is traced back to, and Erik Jansch is another one, a system thinker back in the 70s. And he had this idea of transdisciplinarity, which basically, he made this distinction between disciplinarity, pluricross, inter and transdisciplinarity. And for him, the main difference between interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity was that interdisciplinarity somehow connects two different disciplines at two levels. He has a hierarchy of levels, that's okay. Whereas transdisciplinarity would connect the whole scientific and education system to one new purpose. The example he gives is that he says, well, the traditional purpose of Western science is progress. If we would take ecological cycles as a purpose, then we would have a different kind of science. That's what he says. He also says elephants will have another science system than human beings. So the purpose is like what he says is, if you define all the scientific things we do, the experiments we do, the theories we build to one specific purpose, if you change that purpose, that's a kind of a transdisciplinary happening. In principle, what I want to say here is that there are lots of definitions. All of them agree that interdisciplinarity goes further than transdisciplinarity. That transdisciplinarity goes further than interdisciplinarity. They just have different purposes or goals in mind, right? That's how they differ. And my assumption is that different researchers follow different aims with transdisciplinarity, and they define it so that it is adequate for their aim, right? That's why we have this plurality, and that's okay. I like pluralities. I like to sort out things too. I don't think we should have one definition, but I think we should be clear about our own definition and that there are others, and we should use them as tools, basically. This is a very broad definition of interdisciplinarity taken from a book of the National Academy of Sciences in the US. It's called Facilitating Interdisciplinarity. It was written in 2005, and I give you time to read through. So the definition basically says you have just to combine two things, be it data, be it theories, be it concepts of two different disciplines or bodies of specialized knowledge. I mean, you could say that farmers also have a body of specialized knowledge, civil servants also. Then it's kind of broader, but that's not what they thought actually. They thought of disciplines, but you could make it larger than that. And it also says that it can be done by teams or by individuals, right? That's the discussion that often pops up. Can I do my inter and transdisciplinary research on my own? Or do we have to build a team? The US Americans say both is possible. They also include, or they provide two different purposes for interdisciplinary research. One is fundamental understanding. I want to understand things better. One is problem solving, right? And I think very often in the German understanding of transdisciplinarity, the problem solving is basically what we're at. But again, they introduce different purposes. We took, or the TTNet took those different purposes. That's in the middle. What's the purpose of inter and transdisciplinary research? On the top you see like fundamental understanding, to develop an understanding. On the bottom you see to develop solutions, the two possibilities. And then we kind of split it up again, always trying to build a framework to differentiate between different definitions. We split that up again by asking what kind of knowledge is included. Is it scientific knowledge only, that's the green part, or is it what we call non-scientific bodies of knowledge? I mean, that's kind of very tricky terminology, you know. By science, I mean the German expression Wissenschaft, not only natural sciences, right? So it's a broad understanding of science. Why do I have to use Joey Klein asked me, why do you use the expression non-scientific? It's so excluding somehow. It could also be practice knowledge or something like that. So I was not thinking, or we were not thinking too much about the expressions. They can be negotiated. We just wanted to make this difference. So then you find like 4 understandings, which we called encyclopedic understanding, top left, top right, holistic understanding, bottom right, problem solving, and bottom left, reflection in action. I'll go through all of those and give an example, right? The first is to integrate different disciplines and bodies of knowledge. I think the US field of cancer research and all the US American transdisciplinary scholars, they're very good in that. respect. Tobacco research, cancer research, obesity research, so they are kind of coming off the field of public health. And I give you one example of what they did and why I think it is very interesting to combine a lot of different disciplines to look at a phenomenon at a lot of scales, from cells to meanings and social structures, in order to address it, like cancer in this case, right? And that's what they mean by transdisciplinarity, combining lots of disciplines, combining lots of methods, looking at it from very, very different scales. Here in this picture you see a graph that shows breast cancer in what is called white and black women. What they found, looking at this, they found that even if the detection of breast cancer, even if they detect more breast cancer in white women, the mortality is higher in black women. Basically, that's what the picture says, right? And then they looked at it at all kind of, with all these kind of levels. They created a huge framework where they looked at the social determinants, the healthcare system, behavioral things, biological things, over the whole stage of cancer from pre-disease to mortality. And what they basically found is that black women very often live in very challenging neighborhoods. They're very often alone with their children. They're exposed to criminality, they're exposed to dangers for themselves, and apparently in this environment they have more stress hormones in their bodies, which somehow contradicts the treatment of cancer, right? That interacts negatively with the cancer treatment. That's what they call how the social gets under your skin, right? How the social environment influences treatments. So that's basically what they found. And they found that by looking at the very, very different levels, from the social determinants to the biological level, and by combining that. Yes?
So this was an example, you're saying this is an example of transdisciplinary. So were there, I guess, practitioners involved in this, like the social workers or the caseworkers, or like how does this become more than just interdisciplinary?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's what the US Americans call transdisciplinary.
That it's different researchers from different disciplines working together.
Yes, researchers from different disciplines work together. That's what they call transdisciplinary. This is how they distinguish it from interdisciplinarity. They say, unidisciplinarity, you don't collaborate, you do your research, and don't integrate it. And then interdisciplinarity, that's basically the definition I showed you a minute ago, right? And then they say from inter to trans, the step from inter to trans is that we transcendent disciplinary boundaries, create an understanding that is independent from disciplines. I think that's basically what they mean by that one, right? Mm-hmm. Goes beyond, integrates, and is through that able to come up with a new, very, very encompassing understanding of cancer.
So it's co-creation.
Co-creation between disciplines, right?
Right.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Co-creation between disciplines. And it's true, it's mostly disciplines. Mm-hmm. They use the term transdisciplinary action research if they want to say that also stakeholders are included. Okay. They use different terms, right? It's all about the terminology. And I think it's very helpful. Usually, if this question pops up exactly as you asked it, this is only interdisciplinarity, right, and not trans. And then I usually use that to say, but there is so much in this kind of combination of disciplines and bringing different disciplines together, and integrating, that we shouldn't say only. Mm-hmm. That is something that is usually missed in the German, Swiss transdisciplinary understanding. Usually we say that it's different disciplines and stakeholders, but usually we don't go for a new conceptualization of an issue that connects and integrates different disciplines. So that's why I think it's very helpful to have the US American understanding. They also started, we had these conferences in the US we connected to them, and now they also start to see this stakeholder involvement, and they rethink their whole framing, but basically that's what they mean when they say transdisciplinarity, right? That's why we called it we call it encyclopedic understanding because it's really looking at everything, but it stays within the scientific bodies of knowledge, right? It doesn't include non-scientific bodies of knowledge. Now, the holistic understanding, that's a bit the holistic understanding, where you try to include non-scientific bodies of knowledge and scientific bodies of knowledge. And here I have a very specific example that is not representing the whole community. Here I took Pastoralist Niculescu, right? And Pastoralist Niculescu is a theoretical physics person, I think. He has written the Manifesto of Transdisciplinarity. I mean, if you Google transdisciplinarity, you'll find the manifesto, top in the Google ranking. And the concept of transdisciplinarity that he suggests is that of bringing together scientific thinking, Western scientific thinking and spiritual thinking, basically. He says we have to reintegrate that, right? And that's, I give you time to read through the quote. And for me, it's always, I mean, I have had several meetings, I have seen him at conferences, I have seen talks, and it's always for me very difficult. I'm so much in this Western thought style that it's really hard to get the point when he starts to talk about spiritual things. It's something that he can't explain, it's something that you have to experience, basically. So for me, it's always hard. But I think it is, because it's this kind of levels of reality, and his theory about that is really hard to get. Very specific language. And I think it's a kind of, you can't get it, you have to, you know, it has to be an event inside your body. But I think what is very helpful in this definition is that it suggests that there's the Western way of knowing and there are traditional ways of knowing. And usually, I don't know, traditional ways of knowing lots of them don't make this distinction between spiritual things and the real understanding of things. So if you go for, if you would collaborate with, I don't know, whoever, Sami people or whatever, they would probably have a knowledge system that doesn't make this distinction. So I think, and it's good to have that in mind if you think about transdisciplinarity. That could be one purpose of transdisciplinary research, to bring those things together. I'm not sure, or I doubt heavily that you can integrate them in the sense that at the end it's one thing, but I think that you can work with them in parallel. That's called by some people two-eyed seeing. So you can look at something with a traditional perspective and with a Western scientific one. I'm not sure you can integrate them. So that's probably where I disagree with Pastoralist. The step from inter to transdisciplinarity is basically by this integration, happens by integrating spiritual knowledge and scientific knowledge. I don't actually have an example for that. But I mean, I'm sure Pastoralist is very well received in Latin American countries, for instance. And I think mostly in places where the traditional knowledge is still something that is really under pressure, not taken seriously. I mean, there are good reasons to have such a definition of transdisciplinary research. Yes?
It's much problematic in this, but one thing that is only putting in mail.
Yeah.
He's only talking about his, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but also that I think that this Homo economicus, it's also so many different things. Like
Yeah.
you can take an architect or a social worker. There's a
Yeah.
lot of there's a lot of different things
Yeah.
only in that. So it feels very like
It's very,
square
yeah,
in a way.
yeah.
In the beginning, if you just have these two
Yeah.
parameters, I think.
I mean, I took out quotes, so there's more behind that, but I took out specific quotes But I agree with you, that's a very specific reading of the Homo economicus, right? And it's a very specific reading of human beings as only being the Homo economicus.
I remember immediately Jared was speaking about an example from Australia, and we were working together with native Australians, and how spiritual values were brought forward, and how it was possible to connect to the whole endeavor they were on when those spiritual values were somehow put in center. Although I could still see that they were somehow measured for the purpose of their work, so to say. So when they matched the kind of economic idea, they were brought forward.
They were brought forward.
Didn't match. They were somehow. It was more difficult. So I still think in this image you also have to see define somehow values. So if you continue to work on home economical values and measure religious values according to that.
They'll not disappear.
The context is not changing because we work on this necessarily.
Let's buzzer up. Now the problem solving. We are still within scientific and non-scientific bodies of knowledge, and the goal is to solve societal problems, basically. I assume that this is mostly what you're after, right? But I don't know. The example I've taken here is from the current president of TDNet, of Jakob Zinstag, and it's about nomadic people in the Chad. And Jakob Zinstag is a veterinarian that works in Africa a lot. And they were asked by the Chad government to create a health system that is used by the nomadic people. Because the nomadic people, there was a health system, but the nomadic people just walked by. They didn't care about that. And so they started to do ethnography first, to understand better what the traditional way of, and we're back with traditional, what the traditional way is of healthcare with the nomadic people. So they found out that there are traditional healers, that the traditional healers walk from community to community. They are not stationary. That was the one big thing. And the other big thing was that the traditional healers combine veterinarian care and human health care. There's kind of that's what they call one medicine. Then there's one medicine for both things, which makes a lot of sense because the nomadic community is like a community of camels, sheep, and human beings, right? And there are kind of some of the disease that travel between those beings, right? So it made a lot of sense to have a different approach to medicine. And then Jakob Zinstag and his colleagues designed a new, design thinking, right? They designed a new prototype, basically, of a healthcare system, and then they tried the prototype, they tested it with the nomadic people. That's probably what you will do tomorrow in prototyping. So over years, like this is a project that ran over 15 years or so, until they had a healthcare system that was accepted by they included the traditional healers that was basically accepted by the nomadic people. Interesting is also, for the nomadic people it was clear that, this is now about learning, for the nomadic people it was clear that there's something like one medicine. For a Western person that was not clear. They thought, well, there's human and healthcare. That's two different ways of studying, two different systems. So Jakob took that idea and took that back to the Lancet, which is a very well-known medical journal, and he tried to sell that as an innovation. We should do One Health for specific, like a farm or wherever, or people and their pets. We should look at those things in a one medicine way. And he tries to defend that and has some success, but it's basically very hard to defend what you learned from here, in this case from nomadic people, to bring that back into the science system, in our Western science system, and convince people that we should change the way we do healthcare. But he does that really hard. The distinction here, and that's basically what you said, right? The distinction between inter and transdisciplinary research here is, that's not very clear, this picture. It's like a Venn diagram. On the left-hand side, you would say interdisciplinary research is if different disciplines collaborate. If you collaborate with people from outside academia, from the government sector, from industry, let's call that participatory research. If you combine both, That's how we understand it. So there should be different disciplines, there should be participants from outside, ideally from different stakeholder groups. Then we would call that transdisciplinary research. That's basically, I think, the core of the German understanding. That's basically what we are after at ETH. But it's just one understanding among others, right? Yes?
How do you see the difference between action research and this understanding of transdisciplinary research?
So I think I don't know much about action research, but I think the difference is that we also include the interdisciplinary part somehow. That we say, oh, we should include, which kind of disciplines should we include to get a bit of this encyclopedic view on things. And action research I see more as like, let's implement solutions together with stakeholders and then see what happens. I think that's
and less research, yeah.
And less research, less different disciplines, less complexity of the issue.
Yeah.
More like, let's go and test. I think there's a stronger analytical part, basically, in this understanding. Scientific analytical part. And then there is the last one, which is a little bit tricky. It doesn't somehow really fit into this classification, which we call reflection in action. And that's like if you go back in literature, and it's to consider risks and unintended consequences of solutions. If you go back in literature and if you look for the kind of where does this idea of disciplines that don't understand each other, right? We are back in the scientific system, sorry, right, on the left hand. If you look at this discussion and you find C.P. Snow and his two cultures, that's C.P. Snow, sitting on his two cultures, the natural scientist and the philosopher. And C.P. Snow he lived in the he wrote his important books in the 50s in England. He was part, on the one hand side, of the people that created nuclear power plants, so he was a physics person, and he was also a literary intellectual, so he was in both groups. And in his Two Cultures book, he basically said, he was claiming that those people who want to save the world with nuclear power plants, and those people who are always so skeptical, the literary intellectuals or whoever, that they should come together and fight for nuclear power as the basic solution. That's what he said, basically. I think he complained about the literary intellectuals who were always talking about the risks of the new technologies. And I'm exaggerating a bit, but I think that's what he called the two cultures and the dilemma of the two cultures that hinder world progress, because if they would only collaborate, we would save the world by nuclear power, basically. These two cultures, so basically in that respect now, engineers on the one hand side, or people who create solutions, architects, lawmakers, I don't know, and the criticists of this. In the case of technologies, it's people that do technology assessment, that look for the environmental risks of new technologies, that look at the ethical, legal, and social implications, right? The humanities part. Somehow they don't collaborate, and they don't collaborate today. That's my observation. We also checked that. We sent these categories to our National Science Foundation, and they took it to classify all the proposals they got that were interdisciplinary to see what kind of proposals they get and what kind of proposals they fund at the end. I think like 50% or so were encyclopedic understanding, different disciplines that collaborate. 30 or so % were problem solving, collaborations with stakeholders. And then like very, very few were holistic understanding, and even less were this kind of collaboration between people who create things and people who criticize this. That's really hard to bring those people to collaborate. That stays since the 50s. It's really hard, super hard to find. Either, both of them think they are instrumentalized. The engineers think, they hinder somehow our creativity by always criticizing. They don't see it as a potential. And the humanities, social science persons, they think I'll be instrumentalized. At the end, I'm not allowed to criticize because they will just take what I say and do whatever they like. It's really hard for them to collaborate. And that's why somehow we put this into the bottom left, saying that's the different scientific bodies of knowledge that want to collaborate in terms of new solutions and risks to new solutions. It's problem solving, but it's about the risks that come with these problem solutions. We call that reflection in action, going back to a book by Donald Schoen, I think, the reflective practitioner, where he basically says a good engineer always does things and then he or she reflects about those things and the negative consequences. So that's the introduction. That was already more than 20 minutes. Now, the first task for you would be that you first individually take 5 minutes, think about your connections to transdisciplinarity, what kind of meanings, definitions make sense for you. It can be one, it can be several, it could be a mix, right? And then after 5 minutes or so, I suggest you join in groups of 5 or 6, or I don't really, I mean, 5 is just a kind of a rough estimate. And then you exchange your insights and discuss whether there is in your group a dominant meaning. And then we are back here in like 20 minutes or so. And then whatever your insights are, you present them and we'll discuss where that leads to. So first 5 minutes or so to think for yourself and then to build groups, right? Different understandings. This American, right? The top one was the American bringing together everything. Top right was the buzzer up, holistic, was the spiritual knowledge, and the Western knowledge. Problem solving was solving problems of society. And the last one was bringing together engineers and criticism.
That's a question. The reflection in action is on the scientific bodies of knowledge side.
It's on the scientific part, I think.
But
Because
but
all I
Donald
know.
Schön's writing comes from a practitioner's experiences.
Sorry?
Donald Schön's writing comes from a practitioner.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
But I
So
think I think the way I organize it as bringing together the scientific disciplines that criticize new technologies and the engineers,
the
which are
critique part.
yes, exactly, it's the critique part, right?
Yeah.
That's how I class it. And engineers is also I took engineers as to the scientific body of knowledge. You could also argue that they're way out in practice, but that's why it's organized that way. I know there are all kind of problems.
The fear, I mean, when it comes to nuclear power, the fear of the public, for example, is something like that. I mean,
That's usually done then by those people who do the technology assessment. Oh, sorry, I'm wrong direction. So this is a health technology assessment. This is done by probably, not sure, social scientists, sometimes people that studied medicine and then went into the field of social scientists or ethics. And they, in health technology assessment, they usually do in Switzerland focus group meetings. Sometimes they do surveys. Basically that. I mean, you have to bring it in, but it's very scientific, right? It's not. It's you somehow consult people outside science, and then you extract knowledge, bring it into the science system, right? And then you write a report.
okay.
That's why I put this to the left side.
You just didn't want, it wasn't that you just wanted symmetry in your diagram?
Yes, that was it. To sell it.
That too.
So I mean, but the main point is if you get somehow what is behind those 4 things as a starting point for your reflection, then it's okay. Okay, so yes?
How would you want to work with integrate? This is problematic to me as a definition.
So how would I define integration and integrate? Oh, that's super complicated. So integration is like a term that if you would make a cloud of terms for transdisciplinary texts, you would find integration in the middle. I guess so. And but it's usually not defined. It's hard to define. I think the way Buzzard used it is having 2 parts and kind of fusing them into something that includes both, right? That's Buzzard's view. I think it's much more complicated. If you have different people that participate in a transdisciplinary project, some people will take an idea from here and integrate it in their thinking. That's Jakob Zinstak, who took the one medicine idea from the nomadic people and now tries to bring it back and integrate it into the scientific thinking on medicine. Some people might really kind of discuss intensively for weeks and weeks and stay on their position, and at some point they might find a overall position, right? Might be that the people on cancer research did that. I don't know. Yeah, probably it's like it might be very individualized, but basically I think the integration part is if it changes your basic assumptions, if they're in trouble, and if you have to change them, right? Which is, it's not like taking data, but that's my personal view, right? Some people say it's taking data into a computer model, that's integration, but that's basically you take the data, and I'm interested in the integration where it really challenges your assumptions, where you have to somehow find a new balance, where you see, whoa, I was completely wrong. But that's different levels of integration, I think. For some people, it's really taking data into a model and that's it. It's hard. Actually, we're planning to have a research project on that, on what is integration, because there's so much talking and.
What was the author that you were saying that says one bit that infused them together? The Brazil.
Pasarap Nicolescu?
Oh, okay.
That was that one again.
It was Nico. You were using the first name.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you need the slides? I mean, I can give you the slides. I have them on a stick. Would that be okay? Should have done that before. So, 5 minutes reflection and then 20 minutes discussion or so.